And joining us now to talk about the state of play and where to from here is the Resources Minister, Josh Frydenberg, joining us from Melbourne. Thanks for joining us again, Josh.
Nice to be with you, Chris.
Look, first up, congratulations to you. You're a coalition frontbencher who actually managed to hold his seat. In fact, you got a swing towards you. So you're a little bit of good news for the government overnight.
I think there were some very good results across Victoria. It looks like we've held all our seats, although voting hasn't, and counting of the votes hasn't been completed in seats like Dunkley. And of course, Chisholm is one that we are in a good position to take off the Labor Party.
Victoria has been a bright spot.
The Victorian situation has been positive.
Yeah, it has been a bright spot, and you've probably
no
got
doubt
Daniel Andrews to thank for that. But tell me about your prospects of holding government. Can the Turnbull government cling to power? What percentage chance do you give yourselves?
Well, looking at the numbers, we are very hopeful that we'll be able to govern in our own right. There's still 1.5 million postal votes that need to be counted. That's an enormous number, and obviously it's an increase on previous years, together with the pre-poll numbers that are dramatically up. These have historically tended to favour the coalition quite substantially. So if that trend was to continue, I'm very hopeful that we'll hold those seats like Ford and Capricornia and Herbert in Queensland that are now being debated. Like I said, pick up Chisholm.
So are you suggesting a total of 76 seats? Are you suggesting the bare majority of 76 seats, or do you think you could win 77? What sort of number are you looking at?
Well, I'm not a clairvoyant, Chris, so I can't give you the exact number, but looking at the seats that are now in doubt, I think we have very strong chances in a number of them, and that we will be able to get to that magical 76.
Well, certainly some sources today have suggested that the best the Liberal coalition could do is perhaps 75 plus Bob Katter. Is that how narrow it could be?
Well, it's certainly tight, and as you know, we're not going to know the result for days because counting is still to be done. But I think we're in a good position based on the historical flows of pre-poll votes and postal votes in the past, absentee and provisional votes.
A good position,
and as you know,
a good
Chris,
position is an interesting turn of phrase.
Yeah, but as you know, well, obviously it's not an ideal position because we'd have liked the game to be done and dusted by now, but it's not, and so we just have to wait for these final votes to be counted. But as you know, the coalition is very rigorous in sending out postal vote applications to constituents across the country in seats, and the Labor Party has a very patchy record of doing that, and that could come back to bite them in this case.
Look, if it is that tight, the Labor Party says that they're still looking at that they would try and form a minority government so far. Do you think on the numbers that looks unlikely? If you can't form a majority government, it seems to be beyond the Labor Party. I suppose what I'm getting to is we could be looking at going back to the polls, couldn't we, in some weeks' time?
I think that's jumping the gun to suggest that, and as Malcolm Turnbull made very clear in his press conference today, he is looking to construct a majority, and hopefully that will be done in our own right. But he's also obviously spoken to the crossbenchers, which is a prudent move on his behalf. But I don't think anyone is seriously thinking that the Labor Party will reach that number of 76 in their own right, or even with the Greens and their seat of Melbourne. And who knows about Batman, but obviously that's a seat that they'd take off the Labor Party. So I don't think the Labor Party is in the hunt to govern in their own right, and it's a question of whether the coalition will, and we're very hopeful that that will be the case.
Yeah, my point being, though, that if you can't, then the next most likely option is perhaps a return to the polls.
Look, I think that is just getting ahead of the game here. And
certainly is. That's what we aim to do here on Viewpoint.
Well, I mean, Chris, to be honest, this is an unprecedented number of pre-polls and postal votes.
Yep.
And that is because of the timing of the election. It falls within school holidays in a number of states, and also people have a tendency to vote that way before the election now in greater numbers than previously. And so I think that will determine the outcome in a way that is unprecedented, and based on historical flows, that should help the coalition.
Now, is this a repudiation of Malcolm Turnbull's leadership and a repudiation of the leadership switch from Tony Abbott to Malcolm Turnbull?
Absolutely not. I think Malcolm Turnbull has campaigned very strongly. It was the longest campaign in 60 years at 55 days, and he's put forward a very positive economic plan for the future of this nation.
He managed to get through. He did put through a positive campaign, but he didn't manage to land a blow against a vulnerable Labor leader in Bill Shorten the whole campaign.
Well, I actually don't accept that, Chris. I think he landed a lot of blows, and Labor's economic credibility was torn to shreds when they had to back down on their previous positions around the age pension or around the school kids bonus, and they had to accept that debt and deficit would be higher under the Labor Party than it would be under the coalition, and that they would reveal their economic plan 100 days after the election. That's what the Labor Party told us, and they put that disastrous economic position together to the people, as well as a Medi-Scare campaign, which was undermined by the AMA, but because it was conducted in such a ruthless and shameful manner by the Labor Party, I think it did have an impact on this election, particularly in states like Tasmania, where we went from having 3 of the 5 lower house members to having 0. And having spoken to some of my colleagues in Tasmania, they faced a ruthless, well-resourced attack from the Labor Party and their friends in the Get Up movement and other parallel supporters who really spread terrible lies about what the health system would look like under the coalition.
The trouble is, in talking about those sorts of scare tactics after the election, it sounds very much like sour grapes. The time to attack back and point out these sort of tactics was before the election. I do just want to move on, though, about the nature of the campaign and the suggestions from within your own party that Tony Abbott would have run a much more aggressive campaign attacking Labor. As you say, they're vulnerable on this a reckless fiscal plan, on border protection, on increased costs for electricity, on national security, yet there was not a strong attack against them.
And also, very vulnerable on the fact that Bill Shorten is an unapologetic union leader who has presided over some pretty dodgy deals in the past.
Precisely, yet with all that in your favour, this is where the government is at. So is it not the case that your campaign was simply not aggressive enough?
I think the choice was made to put forward a very positive agenda for the future of this country based on good economic policy. Now, as for the post-mortem and what sort of mix of campaign tactics and strategies could have been adopted, I'll leave that to more professional minds than myself. But I'm very comfortable with the strong and positive message that Malcolm Turnbull put forward, and I do think we will be able to form government, and then some of these debates will become old hat.
Okay, critical thing then, if you can form government, an absolutely crucial thing for the coalition and for the nation is that you can somehow unify your party, put these divisions behind it. Is it then mandatory that Malcolm Turnbull invites Tony Abbott into the cabinet so he joins the front bench and the frontline battle once again?
Well, look, you've asked me that question before, Chris, and I said, that's beyond my pay grade. These are decisions for the Prime Minister. But he has made it,
You don't reckon Tony Abbott would be in your best dozen?
Clear.
You don't reckon Tony Abbott would make the first 18 or the first 11 for the Turnbull government?
Well, look, these are decisions beyond my pay grade. The Prime Minister's made it very clear. The ministry that was prior to the election will remain the ministry after it. Of course, there's a couple of members of the ministry who have looks like they've lost their seats, but it's still too early to reach those conclusions.
Let me finally put it to you this way then, Josh Frydenberg. Given the trauma the government's been through and given how perilous the situation is now, if you hold government, would it not send the right signal to the nation, let alone the party, if Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott could be in a cabinet together fighting for the same policies?
Well, Tony Abbott himself, Chris, has said that he can do an enormous amount of good for the country, for the conservative values that he represents, for his electorate, by sitting in the parliament. So as for which position he sits in, whether it's in the ministry or elsewhere, that's not my particular decision. I know that Tony Abbott wants what's best for the country, and so does Malcolm Turnbull. And the one thing we don't want is a Labor-Greens alliance. It was terrible when it was in place during the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. That's why they got the lowest vote in 100 years at the 2013 election. And we just don't want to see that level of failure again at the national level.
Great. Josh Frydenberg, thanks again for joining us on Viewpoint.
Good to be with you.
That's the Resources Minister, Josh Frydenberg there, not saying whether or not Tony Abbott should come back into the Turnbull cabinet. We'll certainly see about that. Malcolm Turnbull certainly made no suggestions that that is going to happen. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we want to speak to